12 legends, 12 smiles the cameras loved. Behind every one of them, a secret carried alone. Stay to the very end of this list, because the most famous voice you'll hear today was suffering the entire time, and almost nobody standing next to him ever admitted it out loud.
We'll live each day in springtime.
Number 12. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross sold out arenas with a voice built for intimacy, the kind that made strangers feel like he was singing directly to them. But offstage, Luther fought a private, lifelong war with his weight, cycling through dramatic losses and gains that tabloids mocked instead of understood. Few knew he was also managing serious complications tied to diabetes and hypertension. For years before any public crisis forced the truth into the open, he kept his personal life almost entirely sealed off, giving interviews built around music and craft while steering every question away from the man underneath. Friends later said Luther treated the stage like armor, a place where he controlled every note, because so much of his real life felt out of his hands. Colleagues from the studio described someone meticulous to the point of obsession, redoing vocal takes dozens of times, chasing a perfection that outsiders read as artistry, but insiders sometimes read as anxiety. His inner circle was tiny by design, and reporters who tried to get past the polished image were reportedly redirected every time. In 2003, a stroke left him in a coma for weeks, and the industry that had celebrated his voice for 2 decades suddenly realized how little it actually knew about the man behind it. He recovered enough to sing once more before his death in 2005, accepting a Grammy from a wheelchair, still guarded, still private, even in that moment. Even at the peak of his fame, Luther reportedly turned down opportunities that would have required extended press access, choosing smaller, more controlled promotional appearances instead of the tell-all interviews other stars of his stature routinely gave. Producers who worked closely with him said his perfectionism in the booth was matched only by how carefully he compartmentalized his life outside of it, keeping business, family, and health almost entirely separate from one another. Some biographers have since suggested that the pressure to remain the smooth, romantic voice of an entire genre made it nearly impossible for Luther to publicly acknowledge vulnerability without feeling it would undercut the very image that built his career. The world got the ballads. It never got the man who wrote them from the inside of that struggle. Number 11. Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks helped define the sound of an entire era with The Temptations, his falsetto floating weightlessly over some of the most recognizable records ever made. By the 1980s, he was still performing, still smiling for crowds who remembered him from the glory days at Motown. What most of those crowds did not know was that Eddie had been a heavy smoker for decades, and by the middle of the decade, doctors had reportedly found early signs of lung cancer. He kept working through it, kept touring, kept giving interviews about Motown nostalgia instead of his declining health, treating the diagnosis as something to manage privately rather than share. Those close to him said Eddie deliberately avoided discussing his condition publicly, worried it would change how audiences, promoters, and even his old bandmates treated him once word got out. He reunited with former Temptations for reunion shows even as his condition worsened, pushing through performances that reportedly left him exhausted and short of breath backstage, something he tried hard to hide from photographers and fans lingering by the tour bus. He continued recording, continued accepting bookings, and continued presenting the image of a legend, simply enjoying his legacy, rather than a man quietly running out of time. By 1992, the cancer had spread significantly, and Eddie Kendricks died at just 52 years old. decades younger than the legacy he left behind him. Many fans only learned how sick he had actually been after his death was already being announced on the news. Fellow Temptations members later admitted they suspected something was wrong during those final reunion tours. Noticing Eddie declining certain interviews and cutting some performances shorter than usual. But they said he brushed off every direct question with a joke or a change of subject. Doctors who treated him in his final year reportedly described a man determined to keep working for as long as physically possible, viewing continued performance as proof he was still the artist fans remembered, rather than a patient managing a terminal diagnosis. Even his closest family members said Eddie downplayed the severity of his condition in conversations at home, a habit friends attributed to the same quiet pride that had defined his entire approach to fame. For a man whose voice once soared effortlessly above everyone else's in the group, Eddie spent his final years making absolutely sure his suffering stayed as quiet as his falsetto was loud.
Here's something most people don't realize. Only about 10% of you watching will hit subscribe. The other 90% just watch and move on. You made it this far, so you're clearly not most people. Hit subscribe. Back to the countdown.
Number 10. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman had one of the most powerful voices to ever come out of Philadelphia soul, a contralto that could fill a room without needing a microphone at all. But behind the glamorous performances, Phyllis reportedly struggled for years with depression that she rarely discussed publicly, choosing instead to let her music carry the emotion. She kept locked away from interviewers. Industry insiders later said she battled real feelings of being overlooked, despite her enormous talent. Watching contemporaries with less vocal ability land bigger opportunities, bigger budgets, and bigger radio support than she ever received. She also reportedly dealt with bipolar disorder, according to people close to her. A diagnosis that went almost entirely unspoken in the press coverage, built around her sultry image and headline performances instead. Phyllis kept a tightly controlled public persona, rarely letting reporters get past the surface of confident performer and gifted, commanding vocalist. Those who worked with her said she could be electric on stage and then completely withdrawn almost immediately after the lights went down, retreating to her dressing room alone for hours. She battled alcohol dependency as well during difficult stretches. Something bandmates said she worked hard to hide from label executives who might have used it against her career. In 1991, she landed a Tony-nominated role on Broadway in Sophisticated Ladies, a professional triumph that masked how much private pain she was still carrying beneath the acclaim. In 1995, just hours before a scheduled performance at the Apollo Theater, Phyllis took her own life, leaving behind a note that reportedly referenced her exhaustion with the pain she had been hiding for years. Fellow performers who had shared bills with her over the years described a woman who gave everything to an audience and then vanished the second the applause ended, disappearing into hotel rooms alone rather than joining the after-show gatherings other artists used to unwind. Musicians who worked closely with her in the studio said she occasionally hinted at how tired she was of the business itself. Remarks that at the time were interpreted as ordinary industry frustration rather than genuine warning signs of something far more serious. Even members of her own management team later admitted they had underestimated how close she was to crisis, focused instead on her upcoming Broadway commitments and a new album that never got the chance to be finished. The industry that had praised her voice for 2 decades was left stunned, many admitting afterward they had no real idea how much she had truly been suffering. Number 9. Rick James. Rick James built an entire image around excess, and for years, that That image made it easy for everyone to assume his chaos was simply entertainment rather than a genuine crisis. But behind the persona, Rick was fighting an addiction that reportedly escalated heavily through the 1980s. Fueled by the pressure of maintaining superstar status after his commercial peak began to fade. Those close to him said the drug use was never the party the public imagined, but a compulsion he could not control. One that cost him relationships, enormous sums of money, and eventually his freedom entirely. In 1991, legal trouble tied to his behavior during this period led directly to prison time, a fall that shocked fans who had only ever seen the funk icon. Not the man underneath struggling with genuine dependency. Rick reportedly tried to get clean multiple separate times, checking into treatment programs that rarely made headlines the way his arrests and courtroom appearances always did. Collaborators from that era described someone who could be brilliant in short creative bursts, and then completely unreachable for days at a time, cycling through highs that masked how unwell he actually was becoming. A stroke in the mid-1990s left him with lasting physical pain that reportedly deepened his dependency even further. Something he rarely addressed candidly in the interviews he continued to give about his legacy. The industry largely treated his decline as tabloid gossip rather than a health crisis worth real concern. And few outlets covered his addiction with anything resembling compassion or context. Musicians who toured with him in his final years said Rick would often disappear for hours before a show and reappear just in time to perform, a pattern the crew learned to work around rather than question directly out of respect for his stature. He reportedly spoke in a small number of later interviews about wanting to warn young artists coming up behind him, framing his own story as a cautionary tale, even while still privately struggling with the very behaviors he was cautioning others against. Family members said Rick's public bravado made it almost impossible for anyone close to him to have an honest conversation about how serious his health had actually become in his final years. Rick James died in 2004, and only afterward did toxicology reports reveal just how much he had still been struggling, hidden behind a legacy built entirely on larger-than-life performance. She likes the boys in the band. Number 8. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass had one of the most commanding voices and stage presences in all of soul music. A performer whose concerts reportedly caused women in the audience to faint from the sheer intensity. In March of 1982, a car accident left him paralyzed from the chest down, a tragedy the public knew about almost immediately from the headlines. What audiences did not fully grasp was the years of private psychological suffering that followed, as Teddy struggled to reconcile his new physical reality with the larger-than-life image fans still expected from him on stage. He rarely discussed the depression that reportedly consumed him in the years immediately following the accident, choosing instead to present a story of triumphant recovery for interviews and carefully managed public appearances. Those close to him said the transition was brutal, filled with private moments of despair that never made it into the comeback narrative the industry preferred to tell about him. He faced additional health complications through the decade, including pneumonia scares that reportedly went largely unreported at the time, treated instead as minor scheduling delays rather than genuine medical emergencies. Teddy did eventually return to music, releasing new material and performing again from his wheelchair. But colleagues said the man behind those later performances was carrying weight the audience in the seats never actually saw. He became an advocate for spinal cord injury research, channeling his pain into purpose. But even that public mission masked years of quieter, more private struggle that rarely made it into the interviews. Close friends said Teddy structured entire conversations to avoid discussing how he was actually feeling on any given day, redirecting instead toward his foundation work or upcoming projects whenever the subject of his own well-being came up. Nurses and caretakers who worked with him over the years reportedly described a man who pushed himself through physical therapy and public appearances alike with an intensity that sometimes worried the people responsible for his care. Even his return to the recording studio, celebrated as a triumphant comeback by the press, was reportedly far more physically and emotionally grueling behind the scenes than the finished, polished records ever let on. Teddy Pendergrass spent decades showing the world resilience while keeping the hardest parts of that resilience almost entirely to himself, right up until his death in 2010. Number 7. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack wrote and performed some of the most influential soul records of his generation. But his personal life was shadowed by tragedy that rarely made it into the liner notes of his own albums. After marrying Sam Cooke's widow shortly following Cooke's death in 1964, Bobby faced intense public backlash that reportedly haunted him for years, even as he kept working and recording, through relentless criticism from fans and press alike. In the 1970s and 1980s, he battled addiction that he later admitted nearly destroyed his career entirely, though at the time, audiences mostly saw a prolific hitmaker rather than a man quietly in crisis behind the scenes. Bobby also endured devastating personal losses, including the death of his brother Harry, who was killed by a girlfriend, and later the death of his own young son. Grief he reportedly buried in work rather than ever processing openly with anyone close to him. Collaborators said Bobby rarely spoke about his pain directly in interviews, preferring to let it surface obliquely in his songwriting instead of in any candid conversation about his private life. He continued producing hits for himself and for other artists throughout the era, all while privately dealing with substance struggles that industry insiders quietly acknowledged but almost never discussed publicly or on the record. Bobby also battled a cocaine addiction that reportedly cost him significant career opportunities during the 1980s, a period he later described as some of the darkest years of his entire life. By the time Bobby got clean later in life, he had spent decades performing through pain that almost none of his fans ever saw named directly in any headline. Longtime collaborators said Bobby had a habit of writing his most painful lyrics about someone else entirely, using third-person narratives and fictional characters as a shield, so that even the people closest to him sometimes could not tell how much of a given song was actually confession. He also reportedly struggled for years with guilt surrounding his brother Harry's death. A private grief friend said he almost never spoke about directly, choosing silence over explanation whenever the subject came up. Bobby Womack turned decades of private devastation into some of soul's most enduring records, and the true cost of that trade stayed mostly hidden from the people buying them. Number 6. David Ruffin. David Ruffin's voice powered some of the Temptations' biggest and most enduring records, but after his removal from the group in 1968, his life began a decline the public rarely saw up close or understood in real time. Behind a string of solo hits, David reportedly struggled with a serious addiction that industry insiders whispered about for years, while interviews stayed carefully focused on his music and his celebrated Motown legacy instead. Those close to him said the addiction drained his finances dramatically, leaving a man who had once commanded top billing reportedly unable to consistently pay basic expenses by the 1980s.
And I think it was sure.
A fact he worked hard to keep from the press. David kept performing through this period, taking bookings that colleagues later said he was in no real condition to fulfill.
Then it was
determined to maintain an image of the polished Motown veteran audiences remembered. He rarely discussed his struggles publicly, and when interviewers gently raised the rumors, he typically deflected the conversation back toward talk of reunions and past glory instead. Former bandmates said they occasionally tried to intervene privately, arranging conversations and even brief stints in treatment. But the culture of the industry at the time rarely supported sustained accountability for artists still selling tickets. He was reportedly arrested multiple times during the 1980s on drug-related charges that received minimal national coverage compared to the attention his music once commanded. In 1991, David died from what was reportedly a drug overdose. A death that stunned fans who had no real sense of how far he had fallen behind the polished scenes of his public performances. Road managers reportedly scrambled behind the scenes to cover missed sound checks and late arrivals, quietly managing a crisis that rarely made it into local coverage of the shows themselves. David Ruffin spent his final chapter performing a version of himself the public wanted to see, while the real Toll stayed carefully out of view until it was already too late. Number 5. Esther Phillips. Esther Phillips had a raw, aching voice that influenced countless singers who came after her. But her career was shadowed for years by an addiction that reportedly began when she was still a teenager, touring with bandleader Johnny Otis. By the 1960s, Esther was managing heroin addiction largely out of public view, a battle that press coverage of the era mostly ignored in favor of simply focusing on her chart performance and comeback singles. She would disappear from the spotlight for long stretches at a time, returning with new material while rarely addressing what those absences had actually involved behind closed doors. In the early 1970s, Esther was reportedly candid in a small number of interviews about her struggles, but mainstream press largely treated her honesty as scandal rather than meaningful context for the pain running through her music. She continued recording acclaimed albums throughout the decade, even while privately battling relapses that colleagues said were far more frequent and far more severe than the public ever understood. Esther's resilience earned her real respect within the industry, including a Grammy nomination that famously lost to Aretha Franklin, in a category many critics still argue about today. But her personal battles rarely factored into how she was covered at the time. She spent stretches in recovery programs that she kept almost entirely private, resuming her career each time without ever publicly detailing what treatment had actually looked like. She died in 1984 from complications reportedly tied to years of substance use. A quiet end for an artist whose suffering had mostly stayed a private, ongoing story, rather than a public one anyone outside her circle really knew. Musicians who recorded alongside her said Esther's voice carried a rawness in the studio that felt almost too honest for the era, a quality some producers reportedly tried to soften rather than fully understand as an expression of what she was actually living through. Fans who followed her career closely noted the repeated pattern of comeback albums following unexplained absences, but coverage at the time rarely connected those gaps to the ongoing struggle happening well outside the spotlight. Even late in her career, when critics praised her for reinventing herself within jazz and blues circles, few reviews acknowledged the toll that decades of addiction had already quietly taken on both her health and her finances. Esther Phillips turned pain into some of the most emotionally raw recordings in R&B history, while the pain itself stayed largely unspoken until it was far too late to help her. Number 4. Minnie Riperton. Minnie Riperton was known for a 5-octave range that made her one of the most technically gifted vocalists of her generation, and for a warmth that made audiences adore her almost instantly. In 1976, Minnie was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she made the unusual choice to speak about it publicly. becoming one of the first major celebrities to do so, at a time when the disease was rarely discussed openly at all. What audiences did not always grasp was how much she continued to hide the day-to-day severity of her condition, even while publicly advocating for cancer awareness across the country. She kept touring and recording new material through years of treatment, presenting an image of hopeful resilience, while privately, according to those close to her, managing pain and exhaustion that rarely made it into her carefully scheduled interviews. Minnie became a national spokesperson for the American Cancer Society, using her platform to encourage early detection, all while her own prognosis reportedly grew steadily worse behind the scenes of every public appearance she made. Friends said she wanted her children to remember her performing and living fully, not visibly suffering. And she deliberately structured her public appearances around that specific wish. She continued writing and recording new songs, even in her final months, refusing to let her illness fully dictate the creative identity she had spent years building for herself and her family. In 1979, Minnie Riperton died at just 31 years old. A loss that shocked fans who had seen her tireless advocacy, but had not fully understood how far her own illness had actually progressed behind the scenes. Fellow musicians who worked with her during those final years said Minnie insisted on rehearsing and recording at full intensity, even on days when her physical condition made it genuinely difficult, refusing any special treatment that might signal to the rest of the room how sick she truly was. Her husband later said in interviews that Minnie made a conscious decision to keep her children's daily lives as unaffected as possible, shielding them from hospital visits and difficult conversations for as long as she possibly could. Cancer researchers and advocacy organizations she partnered with said her willingness to speak publicly at all was itself remarkable for the era, even though what she actually shared publicly represented only a small fraction of what she was privately enduring day to day. Minnie turned her private suffering into public purpose, but the true weight of what she was carrying stayed mostly hers alone until the very end. Number 3. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway had one of the most emotionally devastating voices in soul music, capable of turning a simple lyric into something that felt like a whispered confession between friends. Few outside his closest circle knew that Donny was reportedly diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia in the mid-1970s. A condition he and those around him worked hard to keep entirely out of public view. He continued recording and performing through periods of what collaborators described as serious psychological distress, presenting a composed image in interviews that rarely hinted at what he was privately enduring behind that calm exterior. Those who worked with him in the studio said his creative genius and his suffering were sometimes inseparable, with brilliant sessions occasionally followed by frightening episodes that terrified the people closest to him. Donny was reportedly hospitalized multiple times during the decade for treatment, but this information rarely reached the public, who continued to know him primarily as a hit-making collaborator alongside Roberta Flack. His duet partner Roberta later said she saw the warning signs building for years, but felt the industry around them offered almost no real infrastructure for supporting an artist through a serious mental health crisis. Donny reportedly experienced periods of paranoia so intense that recording sessions had to be paused entirely. Details that management worked hard to keep out of the trade papers at the time. In January of 1979, Donny fell to his death from a New York City hotel room, a death officially ruled a suicide, though friends and family have long disputed the full circumstances and questioned how much his illness was truly understood or supported by those around him. His family reportedly tried to get him consistent, long-term care. But treatment options and public understanding of severe mental illness in that era were limited at best. And stigma made open discussion nearly impossible, even within his own circle. The industry's response focused almost entirely on his musical legacy, with little public acknowledgement at the time of the mental health crisis he had been quietly living through for years. Number 2. Little Willie John. Little Willie John had a voice that influenced an entire generation of soul singers, including James Brown, who idolized him for years before ever becoming a star in his own right. By the early 1960s, Willie's career had begun a steep decline, driven by industry mismanagement and personal struggles that rarely made it into the coverage surrounding his earlier string of hits.
Thank you so much.
In 1964, Willie was convicted of manslaughter following a fatal altercation. A case surrounded by disputed details that have never been fully resolved by historians or biographers to this day. He was sentenced to prison, and it was there, largely out of public sight, that his health reportedly deteriorated dramatically, under conditions former associates later described as neglectful at best. Few fans on the outside knew how severe his physical decline had become, since prison records and outside coverage of incarcerated performers from that era were minimal to non-existent. James Brown reportedly tried repeatedly to advocate on Willie's behalf from the outside, a loyalty that stemmed from how much the younger star still credited Willie for shaping his own early sound and stage presence. Fellow inmates and prison staff later gave conflicting accounts of Willie's final months, with some alleging he was denied adequate medical care despite visibly declining health in the months before his death. In 1968, Little Willie John died in prison at just 30 years old, with the official cause reportedly listed as a heart attack, though the exact circumstances remain disputed by people who knew him best. His death received relatively little mainstream attention at the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gaye.
A stunning silence for a man whose music had shaped the sound of soul before almost anyone outside the industry knew his actual name.
Stevie Wonder for the last 20 years, folks.
Music historians have since argued that Willie John's premature death likely erased years of additional recordings the genre never got to hear.
30 years.
A loss compounded by how little public pressure existed at the time to look closely into his final months. Little Willie John's suffering played out almost entirely behind bars and behind the scenes, invisible to the very audience that once filled rooms just to hear him sing. Number 1. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was arguably the most gifted vocalist and songwriter soul music ever produced, a man capable of turning heartbreak, politics, and desire into some of the most enduring records in American history. But behind the acclaim, Marvin reportedly battled severe depression and cocaine addiction for years.
25, it's going to be a black.
Struggles that intensified through the late 1970s as his marriage collapsed and his finances spiraled into genuine crisis.
Save a world.
He kept working through it, recording some of his most celebrated material, even while privately,
Male in a white t-shirt.
There's far too many.
according to those closest to him, contemplating his own death on multiple documented occasions. Marvin's relationship with his father was reportedly marked by decades of conflict and abuse that he rarely discussed publicly,
For only love.
carrying that tension quietly beneath a public persona built entirely on sensuality and romance. Friends said he isolated himself for long stretches during the early 1980s, holed up in Belgium at one point, and consumed by paranoia that the industry around him largely chose not to address in any meaningful way. He reportedly kept a handgun close by for years, telling those nearest to him that he did not expect to live to see 50. A chilling admission that rarely left the privacy of those conversations. His 1982 comeback with Sexual Healing looked to the outside world like triumphant reinvention, but people close to him said the private reality was far darker. A man still deeply unwell behind a career resurgence everyone else was celebrating. On April 1st, 1984, Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his own father during a confrontation at the family home. A tragedy that finally exposed to the public just how much turmoil had been building for years. Hidden behind one of the most celebrated careers in music history, his siblings later said the tension between Marvin and his father had been building for decades, rooted in conflict going back to his childhood that no one in the family ever fully resolved, despite years of warning signs. The world had been listening to Marvin Gaye's pain in his lyrics the entire time. It never realized just how literally he meant every single word.